Good morning, and welcome to our Bible study series focusing on the principles of discipleship as found in the Bible. Becoming His beloved, answering God's call to discipleship. Now, this is a Bible study, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Henderson, and it is much more gratifying to each of you if you would engage in personal study of the Bible rather than just listening to the segments where we talk about it. It will mean so much more to you. The whole purpose of this is to encourage everyone to not only just read the Bible, but to study it in a methodical, systematic way. Now, I have been contacted since we began this series by a number of people who have asked, how is the best way to study the Bible? Well, I have a very strong opinion about that. There are many who say, well, read some from the Old Testament, some from the New Testament, some from Psalms, and sort of skipped about. It will not take you very long, and we have mentioned it during this series a number of times, that everything that is occurring in the Bible is progressive. It builds upon what has already happened. Plus, new things are happening that not only clarify lessons of things that have gone before, but then utilize new things that are happening, which are then hearkened back to. So, my recommendation is, first of all, have an annotated or study Bible, because that gives you access to explanations of confusing or obscure things that may happen that really make it a lot more meaningful and adds a lot to what you are doing. I recommend that you start with Genesis and go all the way through to Revelation. If you read one chapter a day in the Bible, you will cover the Bible in 36 months. If you read 3 chapters a day, which doesn't take but about 15 minutes, sometimes less than that, you will go completely through the Bible in a meaningful way in 1 year. What do you do then? Back to Genesis, and you start over and do the whole thing and watch how that way to study the Bible becomes increasingly meaningful as you anticipate and know what is happening next, and as you begin to be able to fit the patterns together, much as we do here. Now, we are in the book of Joshua. Joshua, if you will remember, is the heir to Moses. Moses has died on the east side of the Jordan River, leaving the several million Hebrews or Israelites in what is essentially modern day Jordan, looking across the Jordan River at the Holy Land, the Promised Land that has been promised to them for now going on 500 years by God's promise to Abraham. Now, at this point, the only Israelis or Israelites who have set foot in the Promised Land since the Exodus are the original spies that were sent, who came back and gave the negative report. All but 2 gave negative report. No, it's just too many people, they're too big, we can't go. And with that, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. While that generation of the faithless and the doubters died out, Those spies had been in the Holy Land, however. And remember, in the last segment, we discussed that Joshua sent 2 spies over across the Jordan into Jericho to just sense and see what the fortifications were and what would be necessary in order to capture Jericho, which is 5 miles away from where they are. 5 miles across the Jordan River, then 5 miles, and we're to Jericho. So nobody really has been in the Promised Land. We know that it was completely occupied with walled cities in a series of small kingdoms, some of whom were allies of each other, many of which were at war with each other. So this is where we are today. The Israelites are about to cross the Jordan River. Now, as has been happening with Moses since before the Exodus and during these 40 years, God speaks very specifically to Joshua about how this crossing is to take place. Now, imagine yourself as one of the Israelites, and it's the morning when we're going to cross over into the Promised Land. There's a good bit of excitement, but there's one problem. It's in the springtime. A lot of rain up north, and in that region, the Jordan River is in flood stage. It is not real deep, but it is real wide, and it is rushing down. And we've got men, women, cattle, children, carts, all manner of stuff that needs to cross there. God specifically tells Joshua, this is the way I want you to do this. And this is how they did it. Remember the Ark of the Covenant, that gold thing that houses many of the 10 Commandments, the tablets of Moses, and Aaron's original rod. At that point, some say that it had some of the original manna in it, which had not deteriorated spiritually, miraculously, but it is what is identified as the presence of God. It's the symbol at this point of the presence of God. Only can it be carried by Levites on the long poles. Very heavy, this Ark of the Covenant, with the gold cherubim on top of it. It has gone into the battles with the Israelites, and the Israelites have followed it on all of its journeys through the wilderness. So the Lord prescribed that what happens is the priests or Levites, I believe it was priests that were carrying it that day, that the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant are to take the covenant and go down to the edge of the water and step into the water and stop right there where the Israelites are right behind them. God has specifically told Joshua that the Jordan River will be stopped. Remember, in all of the plagues, that was one of the great things that we see about the revelations of God to individuals who are seeking His will. In each of the plagues, God didn't tell Moses, when you tell the Pharaoh that something is going to happen, he didn't say a bad thing is going to happen if you don't let my people go 10 times for the 10 plagues. He told exactly what each plague was going to be, whether it was locusts or frogs or the Nile turning and all the water turning to blood. Moses was able to tell the Pharaoh exactly what would happen, and exactly that always happened. So Joshua would have that experience. So here comes the priests carrying the sacred Ark of the Covenant, and they step into the flooding Jordan. And all of a sudden, their feet are no longer underwater. The Jordan River stops. What's there goes on down, and just like when the crossing of the Red Sea, the Israelites were able to then cross on the gravelly base floor of the Jordan River. When all of that was finished, which probably took the better part of at least a day for everyone to cross, the ark then moved over into the promised land, and when the priest's feet hit the dirt of the promised land, the Jordan River was back in full flood stage again. Now, we have a pattern of God telling His chosen leaders in great detail what He wants done about each of the major episodes that have occurred so far. And it is the same thing here, because they are facing Jericho. At this point, Joshua does not know how they are to capture Jericho. I suspect, being a military person himself, he thinks that the city, which is heavily fortified by thick walls and high walls, with some 1,200 people in it, he suspects that it's going to be besieged in typical warfare fashion, and that they will essentially starve the inhabitants out. But before this happens, the Israelites, having now crossed over into the promised land, go through about a 4-part thing that occurs during approximately a 30-day rest. They're excited. They don't know what is in front of them. It looks pretty daunting because, as we said, the promised land is thoroughly inhabited by people who are quite happy to be there and have no intention of leaving. And the Israelites know this. Now, several things happen during this 30-day period. One is a purification process of the faith. And one of the attributes of that is that all of the Israelite men who have not been circumcised, which was most of them, it's very curious that during the time of Moses, they began their 40 years with the circumcision of everyone, as you'll recall, at Mount Sinai. But then it's not mentioned again during the accounts of the 40 days, and it turns out that it was a neglected practice. And so what they did was they utilized this time. They did that. There was some recovery from that. Then there was a lot of teaching, because now God has told Joshua exactly how Jericho is to be captured. And the people are involved, and so they have to all be taught exactly what everyone is to do as they approach Jericho. They are resting because they are beginning the arduous task of taking the promised land. But something else happens during that 30-day period when they've just stepped into the promised land. Remember the manna? The manna, the bread, the grain-like substance that the Israelites used to make bread for 40 years, when they stepped foot into the promised land, the manna stopped. Why did the manna stop? Because God had made other provisions for them. They were looking at a vast, fertile land. They were already partaking of grapes and milk and honey, if you will. The manna was a very important thing while it was being showered upon them every morning during the night, so it was there in the morning. God was using the manna to teach the people daily of their dependence upon Him. Now He has ceased the manna, and the lesson there is that you are still dependent upon me. Remember that. But now added to that is your own responsibility to live your life in thankfulness with what I have given you, and remembering that you are indeed dependent upon me. Now, with that, they then are to go to Jericho. And God once again very specifically tells Joshua what is to happen. And we will begin with that in the next session. Thank you so much.